I'm lucky enough to have mugwort growing all around where I live, and it even grows a few paces from my front door. Now, my first experience working with mugwort was about a decade ago when I began learning the Tibetan style of direct moxibustion, which is a type of therapy where the dried herb is burned directly on the skin. I've used it to treat chronic injury as well as the accumulation of stress in the body, but it can be used in many different ways. And this is a very special plant to me because it really helps me to slow down, to release a lot of stored tension, and just approach things from a more relaxed and stable perspective. And it's also helped me a lot in resetting my circadian rhythm and sleeping more deeply, but also accessing much greater clarity in the dream state. But that's something we can get more into a bit later on. Common mugwort is part of the Artemisia family, which itself stems from the much larger Asteraceae family, and there are hundreds of different Artemisia species, but this one in particular is Artemisia vulgaris. Common mugwort is incredibly diverse, and there are many different variations within this single species, each one thriving in a slightly different niche. And so it's a very adaptive plant, and in fact the only place that it doesn't grow is Antarctica. Mugwort is a perennial plant that actually spreads mainly through its expansive rhizome system rather than just through seed dispersal alone. And it's a fast-growing herb that can become quite tall, sometimes almost 2 meters, with opposing pinnate leaves that are dark green with a soft velvety white underside that is quite hairy, especially when the plants are younger. It produces small clusters of flowers during midsummer that can be a mixture of yellow, red, purple and brown, and just as the flower panicles are ready to bloom is when the aerial parts should be harvested for medicine making. As the plant matures through the summer, the leaves on the upper branches of the plant right next to the flowers become more lanceolate and slender than the accompanying leaves further down the main stem. The stems of younger plants are green, but as they mature, they transition towards a richer, darker purple color. Mugwort is what we call an edge species because it prefers to grow in the vale where ecosystems merge. And these plants right here are a perfect example of that because you can see they're growing along the edge of the river here, but also along the edge of this quiet country lane, the edge of this field, and just beyond that, they're not that far at all from the edge of this woodland. So you can see that mugwort likes to straddle the various microclimates that together create the broader ecosystem. And this trait to inhabit the spaces between realms is actually very symbolic of mugwort's more magical uses in many different folk traditions around the world. Historically, Native American wisdom declared that mugwort was a steward of ecosystems, that it acted as both protector and nurse to the community of plant species that surrounded it, and in this way, mugwort was deeply revered as a powerful plant spirit that guided the maturity and the development of the landscape. And today we're beginning to understand the truth of this even from a scientific standpoint, because mugwort is now classed as an allelopathic plant. This means that it can synthesize and secrete a number of potent biochemicals through the root system and the aerial parts of the plant, which directly influence the growth and reproduction of surrounding species. So depending on the chemicals produced, the effects can either be beneficial or harmful on the surrounding plant, fungal, and even animal communities. As an effective natural pesticide, mugwort can help to regulate many invasive insect populations while also attracting other beneficial species such as damselflies that actually consume large quantities of mosquitoes. So it's a pioneer plant that prefers disturbed, poor quality soil, so it can pave the way and lay the foundations for successive wild communities to form. But it's also a keystone species, which means that it can determine and define its environment. And because of these allelopathic properties, a lot of effort is being made in widespread agricultural areas to control mugwort's presence, because it naturally wants to steer cultivated land away from monoculture and towards a more complex, mature, and ecologically stable space. In essence, mugwort is an architect of its terrain, helping to determine which species can thrive and also which ones won't survive in the ongoing journey towards biodiversity and ecosystem balance. The genus name Artemisia originates from the Greek goddess Artemis, who is the goddess of the plants and animals of the wilderness, the protector of children, and also of female fertility. Now, Artemis is the leader of the hunt, and so she's often depicted as an archer. And so these descriptions already point towards some of the characteristics and the properties of mugwort. The healing properties of mugwort were explored by the Greek physician Dioscorides in the 1st century AD in his herbal encyclopedia called De Materia Medica, and he wrote about the characteristics of identification for the plant, as well as its bitterness and beneficial effects on digestion, and also its use as an insect repellent. In the following century, the Greek surgeon and philosopher Galen elaborated further on the uses for the different Artemisia species, stating that despite mugwort's warming nature, it was very effective at clearing excess bile from the digestive and circulatory systems. In the centuries that followed Dioscorides and Galen, mugwort maintained an elevated status throughout a number of folk traditions. In ancient Rome, marching soldiers were said to pick mugwort from the roadside and use it to treat fatigue and exhaustion, and they would apply mugwort leaves to the inside of their sandals to reduce the swelling of the feet. In medieval Europe, mugwort was known as the mother of herbs by apothecaries for all of the aforementioned reasons, plus it was a staple of midwives, and many folk traditions routinely placed it as the centerpiece of their fertility rituals and practices, and at the time, it was the herb of choice when treating irregular menstruation because it can increase blood flow in the uterus. Up until the early 16th century in Central and Northern Europe, mugwort was commonly placed at the center of herbal formulas that were used to produce groot, which was a stimulating ale that was very energizing to the body, the mind, and to the libido, and this was entirely different to the more sedative, hop-centric beer that we know today. In the 17th century, the English botanist and herbalist Nicholas Culpeper said, "Its tops, leaves, and flowers are full of virtue, they are aromatic and most safe and excellent in female disorders." And Culpeper also believed that mugwort was essential when treating cases of poisoning and addiction, especially to opium. Throughout history, both Chinese and Japanese medicine used mugwort to treat arthritis through the art of moxibustion, as well as using it for its antiviral properties. In China, mugwort was symbolized by the Han character for cut grass, and the renowned 16th century physician Li Shizhen explained that mugwort can cut out illness like cutting weeds, and this is why the character is as it is. Much more recently in Japan, Dr. Shimataro Hara died in 1991 at the age of 108, and he was the oldest man in all of Japan at that time and was the oldest practicing physician in the world prior to his death. Now, he was an important figure in the development of Japanese moxibustion throughout the last century and was an advocate of burning mugwort on the ST36 point below the knee, a self-treatment that he claimed contributed to his longevity. In Asia, mugwort was and still is added as a popular seasoning to both sweet and savory foods, to rice dishes, meat and vegetable recipes, and to many desserts. Since antiquity, Tibetan physicians called upon mugwort when treating cases of acute swelling in the arms and legs, as well as a way to resolve many cold-natured disorders through moxibustion, smoke inhalation, and bathing in a medicinal tea created from mugwort. And it was also used to pacify the internal wind element, calming anxiety and promoting deeper rest and recovery. Ayurvedic medicine used mugwort to unblock and move vata, or wind energy, in order to soothe the body, to reduce pain, and also calm the mind. And it was a treatment for chronic injuries and arthritis, and also used in the treatment of menstrual discomfort and to ease the contractions of childbirth. Many Native American traditions used mugwort tea as a treatment for colds and flu, and as a female reproductive tonic and remedy for irregular menstruation. And also inhalation of the smoke was a remedy for headaches and to treat insomnia, and both decoctions and poultices of the leaves were used to treat arthritis. Now, the bitterness of this herb was also used to stimulate gastric acid secretions in the stomach and as a liver tonic. All traditions, regardless of era, location, or cultural differences, all shared an understanding of the warming, drying, and unblocking or unclogging properties of this medicine. So mugwort has an incredibly long and storied history of use as a food, a medicine, and also as a magical plant across so many different cultures all around the world. In our current era, we can of course peer through the scientific lens in order to analyze and understand the potent phytochemicals that are manufactured within this very special plant. And it is a rich source of terpenes, flavonoids, coumarins, phenolic acids, tannins, and sterols. As a complement to thousands of years of recorded traditional use, science has also understood a great deal about mugwort. Yet, in spite of this, a quick online search tends to yield very predictable results, referring to mugwort as a novel medicine that is severely lacking in any evidence to support its many health claims. And this is amusing considering that the discovery of artemisinin, which is a sesquiterpene lactone present in many Artemisia species and particularly abundant in the leaves of mugwort, was actually awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2015 due to its success in treating malaria. Some experimental drugs nowadays can arrive on the global marketplace in record time, graduating from the conceptual stage all the way to prescription medicine in a matter of months, where the priority can be persuasive and quite forceful marketing in place of testing for safety or even efficacy. And yet, cross-cultural use of natural medicines since antiquity seems to hold very little weight in today's reductionist approach to allopathic medicine. And in a way, this is a type of cultural genocide that's actually been happening for a long time already, because your great-grandparents probably knew about herbs like mugwort, how to identify them and prepare them and use them at home. But despite our unprecedented access to information now, this cultural lineage has been severed, and not a lot of people now even remember or even care whether herbs like mugwort can help them. So let's take a look at how pretty much all of the traditional uses, plus many more discoveries, are actually fully supported by this supposed lack of evidence. Both Dioscorides and Galen gave an accurate depiction of mugwort because it contains a notable quantity of inulin, which is a dietary fiber that acts as a prebiotic to the beneficial bacteria in the gut, as well as promoting healthy and regular bowel movements. Now, mugwort is also a very rich source of terpenes and essential oils, bitter compounds that can stimulate the processes of digestion, and this bitterness really helps to produce more saliva, and it acts as a cholagogue, which encourages the flow of bile from the liver into the small intestine, as well as the elimination of waste from the colon. So mugwort actually supports pretty much all phases of digestion. An Indian study from 2012 put to the test Dioscorides' claims that mugwort was an effective insect repellent. Now, in the study, Egyptian mosquitoes were exposed to a very low concentration, about 500 parts per million, of essential oils that were extracted from the leaves of mugwort, and after just 8 hours, there was a 100% mortality rate. Subsequent research has also explored this potential action with other insect species like flies and beetles with very promising results. And this isn't only great news for pest control, but it also addresses some major disease vectors as well. In regards to the revitalizing and anti-fatigue properties purported by Roman soldiers, 1,8-cineol is a monoterpene and a major component of essential oils from plants like eucalyptus, rosemary, and cardamom, but it's also one of the more dominant compounds found within the aerial parts of mugwort. And among its numerous uses, 1,8-cineol is known to refresh cognitive function by acting directly on the central nervous system. And a 2012 clinical trial determined that 1,8-cineol extracted from rosemary essential oil influenced many neurochemical pathways in the brain and enhanced cognitive performance, allowing greater speed and accuracy in the processing of information. These results were, of course, from rosemary essential oil, but the 1,8-cineol content found in mugwort is very significant, as much as 27% according to specimens that were wild harvested in Italy. The anti-inflammatory effects documented in ancient Rome were no wives' tale either. An in vivo research paper published in 2021 investigated mugwort leaves and how they may be used to treat pain and inflammation associated with arthritis. The study concluded that ethanol-based extracts of mugwort contained flavonoids that inhibited certain enzymes that play key roles in inflammatory pathways associated with arthritis. The saponins and terpenes of this plant were also observed to inhibit pro-inflammatory cytokines such as tumor necrosis factor, and the sesquiterpenoids and tannins found in mugwort obstructed the activity of the cyclooxygenase enzyme, which is responsible for creating hormone-like lipids that signal inflammation within the body. And this may also strengthen mugwort's ability to promote healthy digestion because of the potential to treat inflammatory disorders within the intestines. Echoing the medieval uses of mugwort for women's reproductive health, it is still used by herbalists today when treating menstrual cramps, premenstrual syndrome, and menopause. And of course, its anti-inflammatory properties will play a role in abdominal cramping, but a 2012 in vivo study also outlined analgesic effects of ethanol extracts of mugwort leaves, and how the presence of flavonoids and saponins in the extract inhibited the perception of pain, as well as working in a very similar way to non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen and naproxen. But what about the stress and emotional undulations of PMS? Well, it's now well documented in the medical field that shortly before menstruation, there is a deficiency in the uptake of neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine in the brain, and this can cause irregular moods, anxiety, and depressive states. The anxiolytic properties of mugwort were explored in an in vivo study from the year 2000, which focused on compounds extracted from mugwort, namely flavonoids and coumarins, and their role as monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Now, monoamine oxidase is an enzyme in the body that causes the oxidation of certain neurotransmitters in the brain, such as serotonin and dopamine. And once this enzyme has catalyzed the breakdown of these neurotransmitters, our mood modulation faculties can become compromised, and cognition, memory, reward mechanisms, and even our ability to learn and feel states of joy can be negatively impacted. So this study identified 5 flavonoids and 3 coumarins in mugwort as having considerable inhibitory activity against monoamine oxidase. And the potency of the flavonoid apigenin was described in the study as comparable to that of clinically used monoamine oxidase inhibitors. This same mechanism will also support older women as they transition through menopause, because monoamine oxidase increases in the female body in correspondence to estrogen decline. Now, an international research paper published in 1998 concluded that 2 flavonoids, in particular apigenin and eriodictyol, were able to induce DNA transcription of estrogen receptors that ultimately increased the uptake of the hormone estradiol, which is the hormone most deficient during menopause that actually contributes to the majority of menopausal symptoms. Estrone is a much weaker form of estrogen that becomes predominant during menopause, but if more estradiol receptors are available, estrone can be converted into estradiol, which promotes much greater endocrine stability and helps to alleviate some of the symptoms of menopause. So the traditional applications of mugwort from medieval Europe are fully supported through scientific inquiry. Native American medicine also favored mugwort for a number of reasons, but smoke inhalation was a popular method for calming and restoring the nerves. And according to a research paper from 2021, mugwort is capable of reversing the degeneration of the central nervous system, which very much supports this traditional use. This in vivo research identified artemisinin, which is a sesquiterpene lactone found in mugwort, as a compound that improved both learning and memory in the test subjects. Now, artemisinin was observed to protect neurons from the loss of their mitochondria, which are the organelles used to produce all of the energy that the neuron needs to function. In this same study, artemisinin also proved its worth in the treatment of Alzheimer's disease by inhibiting the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines, which are immune cells that are involved in the death of neurons as this disease progresses. Native American traditions also used this herb as an expectorant, and a 2009 study discovered that it was indeed very effective as a bronchodilator, helping constricted airways to relax and open more for deeper breathing. And this effect was in part due to mugwort extracts regulating the activity of calcium and a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, both of which are inherently involved in the tightening of the airways in conditions like asthma. Liver inflammation was also a common prescription for mugwort among Native American tribes, and in 2005, 2 teams of scientists in Pakistan conducted a series of in vivo tests to determine its potential as a liver tonic. Now, mugwort extracts were given to the test subjects suffering from hepatitis, and post-treatment examination showed an absence of liver congestion, a significant reduction in inflammation, and reversal of apoptosis, which is the self-destruction of the affected liver cells. And the conclusion of this study said that these findings scientifically validated the traditional use of Artemisia vulgaris for various liver disorders. Artemisinin was under the electron microscope again in 2020 for both in vitro and in vivo studies when it was evaluated for its role in reversing and preventing fibrosis in the liver, lungs and kidneys, as well as in the knee joints and the skin. And the anti-inflammatory properties of artemisinin, coupled with its ability to inhibit fibrosis gene signaling, were believed to be the main mechanisms of action. Throughout the ages, Chinese, Japanese, and Ayurvedic medicine used mugwort as an antiviral, and a 2021 study outlined the various mechanisms through which this herb inhibits viral replication and addresses the inflammatory response caused by infection. And artemisinin compounds were again responsible for regulating inflammatory pathways and inhibiting DNA replication of numerous viruses, including influenza, hepatitis B and C, HIV, and of course, the media's favorite virus. In vivo research from the year 2000 outlined how extracts from the aerial parts of mugwort can effectively and safely reverse high blood pressure. And in the study, elevated blood pressure was induced by norepinephrine, a hormone that is very closely associated with the stress and fight or flight responses. And the extracts were observed to decrease both systolic and diastolic pressures within the heart that were caused by norepinephrine. However, the extracts didn't stimulate or subdue cardiovascular function at all in a stress-free environment, so mugwort only appeared to exhibit this anti-hypertensive effect in an environment of stress when blood pressure was raised considerably. In 2011, a team of scientists from Turkey set out to explore the anti-tumor properties of mugwort by testing its activity against various cell line cultures, and their results showed statistically significant inhibition of estrogen-dependent breast cancer and cervical cancer cells. A Serbian study from 2020 detailed how the flavonoids and phenols from this plant, when combined with the chemotherapy drug mitomycin C, had a cytotoxic effect on human colon cancer cells, while also offering a protective antioxidant effect on the cells of healthy tissues. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of all of the research. There's plenty more studies that are covering these benefits from different angles and different perspectives, plus other studies that are exploring new medical applications that we haven't covered here. But don't forget the script. There is no good scientific evidence to support any of these uses. Mugwort has been a sacred plant to many cultures for millennia as a protector and a guide on the spiritual path, and the nature spirit that inhabits the mugwort plant was understood to be a powerful guardian to those that would invoke it through prayer and ritual. So to explore this side of mugwort, we have to stray from the more linear and often corporately motivated field of medical science and look more towards those ancient cultures whose lives were dictated by the seasonal rhythms of nature. Since pre-Buddhist times, Tibetan people have burned mugwort as a sacrificial herb to appease nature spirits and establish a peaceful relationship with them. And burning mugwort incense was, and still is, believed to repel malevolent entities, harmful energies, and remove obstacles from one's path. Over 1,000 years ago, the Ainu people that were indigenous to northern Japan used mugwort smoke to scare away what they called the devils of disease, and sprigs of mugwort would also be hung up in windows and doorways to protect living spaces from infectious illnesses. In medieval Europe, the festival of St. John in midsummer involved freshly harvested mugwort being woven into girdles and worn around the waist before being cast into a bonfire to ask for protection from disease and misfortune for the following year. And this tradition stemmed from the belief that St. John the Baptist wore a braided garland of mugwort as he traveled the wilderness as a means of defense against evil spirits. Mugwort was the ally of witches and was an important herb in many protective spells and practices of paganism, and druids were also strong proponents of the dream pillow, where fresh mugwort was used as stuffing for pillows, promoting much more vivid dream states where visions and symbols were interpreted as important messages from other dimensions. The Dakota tribe invoked the spirit of mugwort through sacred pipe rituals to protect their community from evil spirits, and also as a ceremony to eliminate obstacles and misfortune when inaugurating a new chief. The Miwok tribe of Northern California used mugwort in much the same way as European paganism. Wreaths of mugwort would be worn by tribespeople to deter ghosts and harmful spirits and to bring good fortune, and then the dried plant would be burned as an offering to the spirits of nature. All of these traditions, often separated by era or continent, all treasured their relationship with this plant for the same reason, that the spirit of mugwort was a benevolent protector of its domain and all of those who dwell within it. And so this really echoes back to the Greek goddess Artemis, the noble steward of the wilderness, and of course the source of the name Artemisia. And so since time immemorial, mugwort has been the guardian of individuals, families, and communities alike. And almost every culture that has worked with mugwort has used it in the context of dream medicine, and this has always been a common theme where people will make direct contact with the spirit of mugwort through the dream state. Tantric Buddhist practitioners in Tibet have burned mugwort incense to assist them in the practice of dream yoga, which is a complex and fascinating series of meditations that must be carried out consciously while awake, but also while sleeping. Now, the purpose of dream yoga is to completely transform one's emotions through the experience of dream, to realize the ultimate nature of one's mind, and in doing so, direct the subtle energies of the body and elicit the deepest healing. There is an extensive tradition of dream healing across Native American cultures. In fact, almost all knowledge of the healing properties of mugwort in Native American herbalism arrived through the medium of dream, as was the case with many plant medicines. And this is the more shamanic side of medicine, a non-linear and less predictable facet of healing that was and still is disregarded by the more surface-dwelling analytical approach to scientific medicine. Yet interestingly, the traditional knowledge of medicine that was acquired through more spiritual means has frequently proven to be very accurate when looked at through the scrutiny of logic and medical science, as we've already seen. Native American traditions, like a great many indigenous peoples the world over, learned about the therapeutic properties of plants from the plants themselves, and not simply through countless generations of trial and error, but from direct communion with the plants. And this contact with plant spirits would often happen during the experience of dream. So sometimes these visions would spontaneously occur, and at other times they would be prompted and guided by a catalyst, such as mugwort. Mugwort contains thujone, which is a monoterpene, and it's an isomer of camphor. And thujone is psychoactive. It's a stimulant to the central nervous system, but it's generally not present in enough quantity to be toxic, unless, of course, somebody was going to consume an insane amount of mugwort all in one sitting. But that said, thujone is still present in enough quantity to have a mild psychoactive effect. The molecular shape of thujone is similar to tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, but it doesn't respond to cannabinoid receptors in the body in the same way. Now, thujone is a GABA antagonist, and GABA is a neurotransmitter that inhibits the excitability of the central nervous system. And as an antagonist to GABA, thujone can create states of excitation within the brain. And perhaps this partially explains mugwort's psychoactive properties and its traditional uses as a herb of vision quests and dream healing, but it's really not possible to dissect the interdependent, sacred complexity of nature through some kind of linear analysis like this, because in centuries past, when the precise and accurate, detailed information on mugwort's healing properties was acquired through dream, this cannot simply be explained away by ingesting or inhaling thujone, or really any other compound for that matter. And this really is the boundary of our new scientific religion, because if something cannot be demystified through a purely logical explanation, then it must be disregarded. But disposing of a truth like this does absolutely nothing to disprove it. So my experience with mugwort as a fire medicine that's used in moxibustion is that it can unblock and release tension, even the most debilitating and immobilizing tension, and all of the pain that can come with something like that. And moxibustion is also very good at increasing the power of the digestive system, at reducing nervous tension, and really just clearing and calming the mind. For me, it definitely promotes a much deeper and more rejuvenating sleep, and it also stimulates a more vivid and almost visionary quality within the dream state. And mugwort is very interesting like this, because it's both a sedative but also a stimulant to the central nervous system. So it can help to calm down a more general and systemic kind of stress and stimulation, but at the same time, it really allows for a much sharper degree of focus and concentration, and not in a draining and exhausting way, but in a more fulfilling and meaningful way. I do find the spirit of the mugwort plant to actually be very gentle and forgiving, and it helps to bring my awareness to the behaviors and the personality traits that are more repetitive and perhaps obstructing personal progress. Because I do find that having a short attention span and being very easily distracted by bite-sized disposable content to be one of the more widespread preoccupations or addictions nowadays. And perhaps this also ties into what Nicholas Culpeper said in the 17th century about mugwort being especially useful in cases of poisoning and addiction, because this modern dependency on screens and devices is definitely very addictive, and it can be rather poisonous. And I do find that mugwort really helps me to focus on what I need to do right now, rather than procrastinating and just wasting my time and energy. Personally speaking, the aroma of burning mugwort helps me to initiate the process of releasing tension almost immediately, which means that my mind and body slow down. I become more aware of myself, more aware of my breathing and my posture, and the things that my mind is choosing to focus on. And so in this way, mugwort's actually very good at helping to loosen and dislodge the psychological and emotional debris and waste matter. But in a very gentle and almost reassuring way. And this does make me think about the many indigenous cultures that have spoken about the warming and unblocking properties of this plant, which I think definitely refer to the psychological and the emotional level as well as the physical. It's also interesting to remember that mugwort is an edge species, and in this case it is operating on the edge of consciousness, and so it can really help to build bridges between mindless autopilot and mindful awareness, but also between wakefulness and sleep. And even within sleep, mugwort can work on the boundary between deep unconscious sleep and the more REM phase of sleep, where vivid and even lucid dreams can occur. As a guardian of the edges, I honestly do find that in a more modern context, mugwort can help to navigate the edge between the algorithmic and hyper-marketed modernity, and on the other side of that edge, the sacredness of the natural world. Because clearly a gulf has formed between the human species and the sacredness of nature. We don't really see anything as sacred anymore, and we tend to have a very atrophied sense of awareness of the intelligence and the sentience within the various kingdoms of nature. And so as a result, we no longer understand that communication between the communities of plants and animals, fungi and people is actually possible, and in fact it's happening constantly. And so this perceived disconnection from the ecosystems where we live is generally why people are so overwhelmed now, so stressed, depressed, anxious and addicted, because the sacredness has been surgically cut out of our modern human experience. We're not interfacing with the land around us anymore, and very few of us have a connection or even an interest in the plants and animals where we live. But developing a deeper sense of connection and even dependency, not to digital devices or the internet, but to the wild, living nature all around us, this can nourish in ways that have become unfamiliar to us, yet the experience feels somehow primordial, like this is how people were always supposed to feel. And so for me, the spirit of mugwort offers an invitation to be more present in this realm, in the natural world all around me, but also within me. And I do believe this is why it can help so much with releasing tension from within the body and mind, and reducing the more mindless and repetitive parts of our personalities, because these are cultivated behaviors, they're learned, and they're often the result of stress and trauma, and they're not relevant at all when experiencing and directly participating in the sacredness of nature. So there are many plant allies that can help to guide us towards a more sane and natural way of living, and some of them are incredibly strong and abrupt, and others, like mugwort, are more gentle and gradual. And I think that recognizing and working with mugwort, or really any plant, not as a substance, but as a being with a complex personality and the innate ability to communicate in its own way, if we are able to listen, this process can serve as a bridge through which we can begin reconnecting with the sacredness of the world all around us.